and so unique as well. And we covered a lot of ground, right? Like if you look at all the kind of potential issues, as well as sort of opportunities for, you know, people to do something against this, right? Or, you know, to prevent or use it in a positive manner. You know, we heard about regulation, about policy, about politicians and influencing politicians and designers, you know, unionizing and getting together in a community, designers in day-to-day life, just being conscientious about how they design for machine learning, as well as walking over to your chief data officer and with an idea and getting that started. Actually, a fun fact is that, I don't know whether you heard the latest story that happened in a little German village where they also tried to prevent a Nazi party, actually an actual party of a neo-Nazi gathering. They bought up all the beer in a 40-mile radius. And literally, try party. So how do we do that in Twitter? Cool though. So basically, I mean, the big questions that for me that come up is, when we see these new technologies, right, and they really seem like the speed of how those are changing, you know, our lives and, you know, human interaction and society, it just seems so incredibly overwhelming, right? And how do we ever get educated enough to actually keep up with this, right? How do we know that large corporations are just pushing business, it's just, you know, having its own momentum there. How do we ever get to be in a situation that we can, you know, have an impact there and really truly steer anything?
Yeah, and this is something that I hear all the time at the meetup, is designers coming up to me being like, okay, how many years do I have left to be a designer before the machines take my job? And it's like, no, that's like not it at all. And like, I love what Jason said too about like, all of us should be participating in the design process. We're all designers, we're all experts in something in our own field. How do we bring that into the machine learning process? And the tools are becoming easier to participate in designing for machine learning, or just what data science and machine learning are actually doing. So to your question about like how do we engage, I think the most important thing is just being open to like, instead of like, that's not my job, the data scientist does that, this is what the number says or whatever, actually leaning in and participating and be like, how did you get that number? Where's the data from? How did you evaluate it? Well, how will this change in 6 months? And being prepared to ask those questions I think is really important. You don't need to have a PhD in theoretical optimization or whatever and be a data scientist in order to participate in designing machine learning, but rather a curiosity of just like, hey, how does the system work? And I think a lot of us, we are in design because we are naturally curious. So, yeah.
We have to share this one mic, so just like grab it in. So from your side, Jen, like in terms of politicians trying to catch up, right, with the developments, but will they ever, right, is the big question. And the other question really that you kind of mentioned as well is, how can we work with politicians and policymakers to actually push this agenda a little further and also in the right direction?
So let's see, will they ever catch up? No. And I would argue we don't necessarily want them to specifically. So after the Zuckerberg hearings, as I'll call them, I remember at least a few people I knew were yelling things on Twitter saying things like, we should only have people in Congress who understand technology, which is my response. Then you'd have Silicon Valley in Congress. And I don't feel like we've done such a great job of kind of governing ourselves here in the last 20, 30 years. So I don't think that's the solution. There's a couple things. One is that what we do need we need public interest technology. And that's something I'm a huge advocate for, and it's something I'm trying to fight for really hard. And by that, that takes the form of everything from Code for America to all the different kind of initiatives there are out there to try to get technologists interested in kind of the public sector and doing stuff for good. I think one of the biggest challenges right now is that was a really easy case to make during the Obama administration, but with this administration in power, it's much harder to get people who may not be any fans of the Trump administration excited about doing public service and being part of digital design initiatives, at least at the federal level. My hope is that we still see people interested in at least doing that with nonprofits and at the state level, even if they're not doing it for the federal government. does show you kind of the dark side of public interest technology, which is that often people grasp power that you don't want to have power. So anyway, so there's that. There's also bringing more. So we need to build that base. We need to bring more expertise to Congress. I'm going to be wonky for a second. We used to have an agency that was killed in 1992 by Newt Gingrich when when the Republican Party took power of Congress, which is called the Office of Technology Assessment. And they basically were a nonpartisan agency that advised Congress on all things technology related. We need something like the OTA again. What we did have during the Obama administration was the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, which is now a ghost town. It's just been decimated. So those people aren't there. We don't have people in Congress. You have various people kind of hanging out in different committees, but you don't have this kind of nonpartisan infrastructure. And I think part of that too is just getting people involved in public interest tech, and whether that's you go to grad school, and if you do a project as part of grad school, you do something that's public interest focused. Michelle did, I think, when she was at Berkeley. Or you get people involved in taking a year or two off and doing some kind of almost like quasi-internship in some public interest space. But I think that's how we start building the expertise and building the bridges. And so some of that work has really been going on for the last decade, I would say, but we need more of it, desperately. And so one of the ways that we're trying to do this at the academic level is really to build out those programs in schools like Berkeley. I'm trying to get it going to some extent at Stanford and other schools so that we can train people to, when they're doing technology-related work, to think, oh, I should actually maybe do something for the public interest, even if I don't ultimately work in that space, so I can at least lend my expertise to people who are trying to make things better. Yeah.
If I could just add to that too, Jen and I were at Berkeley at the same time, both doing grad school. But one thing that is out there, you don't need to straight up leave your job and be like, I'm out, bye tech, whatever. There's a ton of opportunities where you could just volunteer your time, your evenings, your weekends, and participate. I know you mentioned Code for America. They are awesome. There's a Code for SF cohort, as well as a Code for Oakland or Open Oakland cohort. Yeah?
Open Oakland.
Oakland, yeah, Open Oakland. I was like, that's what it is called. And they are awesome. They have a ton of awesome data sets and stuff too. You could do projects with them. The city is so receptive. That's a lot of the type of work that I have done before in the past too, about just making dashboards for commissioners, city commissioners and stuff too, so that way they can explore their data and understand what's actually happening. And there's a ton of other resources too. I will mention a small plug. We do have a meetup coming up in July on specifically AI for social good with machine learning and UX. So if this is of interest, come see our speakers actually talk about it, how they factored into their day-to-day jobs.
Sorry to spoken as a non-panel person, but Open Oakland meets Tuesday nights in the basement of Oakland City Hall.
Yeah.
They're very receptive. The city government is very receptive. Also, San Francisco Digital Services is hiring. To address what Jen was saying, but even on the city level, you don't have to be a resident of San Francisco, but I'd really recommend checking out what they're doing and seeing if EPU can join in on that.
They're all super nice and really fun too. So.
One more, San Francisco, but the mayor's office in social innovation is also
San Francisco Mayor's Office of Social Innovation.
Yeah.
Awesome, great, fantastic. We're actually doing an event tomorrow with a designer from the city and county of San Francisco as well, present at DocuSign. So if you want to come get connected to folks there, that's an opportunity too. Maybe just one more question from my side. So you mentioned a little bit also the international component, right? So with Europe and GDPR and how that one continent kind of putting something like that forward as little as it might actually be, right? In terms of what it has, right? But it has an effect still internationally on technology worldwide, right? Which is an amazing, fact to acknowledge. So how does the sort of the global component also with what's, for example, happening in China, right? Or what's happening in Latin America also kind of in comparison? How do you see things develop there? And that's for everybody.
GDPR is a really interesting case in that there's been a lot of, it's been a year since the GDPR went into effect, and there's been a lot of hand-wringing of, we got all those consent screens back in May last year, and nothing's happened since. And that is because essentially the data protection organizations are basically going through the complaints they've gotten, and they're saying what I've seen other people say, so that's my caveat. So there's a lot of, I don't know if fear is the right word, but there's a lot of concern globally because we see not only the GDPR going into effect, but as goes Europe is going Brazil and a lot of other Latin American countries. And it's being held as the global standard, which the US is not leading in this space at all. So we are very likely to be led by the GDPR for the foreseeable future. There's a lot of talk about passing legislation in the US. It's probably more likely than it's been in a while. We thought 2012 something might happen, and of course it didn't. We probably won't see anything until after the presidential elections would be my guess. But we're still, Congress, we'll see what happens. But for the foreseeable future, I mean, Europe is our privacy regulator, is really important.
So when I'm doing ads for an advertising company, I was one pixel on that big tapestry of ad tech and martech that Jen showed. I think, to sort of, as a very relevant for design, I think the patchwork quilt of legislation that's happening globally will render a massive design problem in that sites and experiences and apps all will have to conform to dozens of different, sometimes competing privacy requirements. And that is, I believe that it is a fundamentally flawed way of getting a good user experience. I think we've gone through a weird thing where we weren't regulated, and so now we're regulating, and now we're designing to the regulation. I think that is horrible. That's why you get pop-up screens that say, do you consent to these 27 things? Scroll down 4 minutes and click yes, please. And the California economy is what, the 9th largest economy in the world, something ridiculous like that. It's a big economy. It's a low number for a state in a country, and it will have its own privacy legislation. So now it's not just countries that you have to deal with, but states. From a business perspective, that becomes massively complicating. So the risk is that design ends up suffering because we go back to not pretending like we don't know anything about anyone, which I think is terrible design. So I know things have gone too far. As a practitioner of data, as a data dude, as a guy who knows things about consumers and targets them based on that, I know things have gone too far, but I also know that the legislation that is being pushed will render this design problem that I think the next generation is going to have to deal with.
That is an excellent point. I just want to add to it for a second, which is, as we see these different regulations roll out, designers are nowhere to be heard. Nowhere. So I am, for better or for worse, a privacy policy expert, and so that's where I've been trying to lead the charge in having conversations about what does it mean to redesign privacy policies from a human-centric point of view, not from a legal point of view. Because what we see is that we see legislation pass, and they'll put things in legislation that says you need to have a link that says privacy policy. This is actually California state law, which has driven the entire world on privacy policy regulations. We have a law, CalOPA, that says you have to have a link on your homepage and it must say privacy policy. It doesn't say it has to be in the footer, of course that's where it's ended up, but that is essentially a design regulation that no designer participated in the generation of. And so you see a little bit of that in the GDPR, if you look at the GDPR and how they talk about consent and consent screens, and there are some design elements in the GDPR that they can try to softly regulate, but for the most part, these voices are not participating in these discussions. So I'm one of the lone people trying to make those arguments from the privacy perspective, but we need more people who are interested in these issues who can actually say, hey, look, let's think about how we do opt-in from a completely human-centric point of view, so it's not just a problem that we just click through and ignore, but actually is meaningful. And part of that has to do with, I it's not all about just the design piece, obviously. Some of it has to do with the laws themselves. Some of it has to do with the fact that the companies don't want to give users the kind of the power of negotiation that we might actually like. It's very much the system is set up to just click through and accept and move on and not actually scrutinize and know what you're agreeing to. So there's structural changes that need to happen, but in terms of the way we see these laws passed, yeah, the design community is totally absent, and that really needs to change.
I take that personally as an ISDA as a representative, so we will open a track on this and see if we can get some designers involved in activities as well. So I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience, if there's any. Yeah, here's right here in the corner. Was that? Yeah, great.
Thank you. Thank you for the fantastic speeches. I'm still a student, so from my surveillance course, I learned something about the conflict between users' needs and the surveillance itself. So for example, we may need Google Maps every day for commuting and for transporting, but that's location thing, and the map, the path we go every day can also be like commercialized and used for making money. So how would you imagine we can deal with this kind of thing, because it's basically conflicting with each other?
I'll just start saying you can offer people location-aware services without tracking their every single movement, saving that forever. One of the things that used to just make me crazy was when I still had an Android phone, I would not have location on, or I would not be signed in. Actually, I'm pretty regular, I would not be signed in. Google on Android, I think I had not just had location on. And every time I tried to use Google Maps, it would fail. Because it immediately was like, you don't have location on. What do I do? Crash. They no longer, now it actually recovers if you don't have location turned on. People go, oh, okay, you want to look something up, that's nice. Just to make the point that you don't have to do the level of incessant tracking. You can make things, time expiration based. I want you to I'll give you my location for an hour. Help me get through this, this new city. But you don't need to save that for the next, 25 years. Just don't need to do that.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's really important too to ask, even as designers, I know a lot of us work on visual systems, but like, where is the data stored? How is this data stored? How do we make it transparent to the end user? How it's also stored and sent to, and like how it might add value to them. Like that's also something that would be really cool. That was a part of our design practice as well, about like, hey, we're using your data for the next hour, we will save it, and we're gonna give you updates on traffic and all this other stuff too. Like, what is the value that I'm getting out of it by giving you this data? We don't really communicate that, and I think for a long time our design practice has just been like, black box, who knows? Just give us your data. And I'd love to see that change.
There was this this author, this writer for the Wall Street Journal. She, a few years ago, probably 5-6 years ago, she broke a lot of the privacy stories for Wall Street Journal, and she wrote a book, and it was called What They Know. And I don't know if you've read it. It's not a bad book, but it's a little alarmist from a data perspective, a data practitioner perspective. And also, the artwork had the data people in short sleeve suits, which I took very personally. That was a punch to the balls, frankly. But I heard her on NPR, and she was talking about how, when she first got turned onto this, about how she was looking at a pair of boots on I mean, you're all familiar with this trope, but she was looking at a pair of boots on a shopping site. She went to CNN, the boots followed her there. She thought, that's weird. This was about 5 years ago, before this was kind of, before we were regulated to this, I suppose. And then she went to a different site, there the boots again, and the boots followed. And she was telling the boots everywhere, and then she was telling the journalist who was interviewing her, so that's how I knew it was a problem. And he goes, well, what did you do? And she goes, well, I bought the boots. And that, to me, highlighted, I think, something that we need to keep in mind, which is that sometimes getting data from customers is a utility. And we should not destroy the entire mechanism to get data from customers in order to give that utility. That being said, there are massive overreaches near constantly. My favorite example is Uber, when they tracked your movement 5 minutes after you left the car. just to make sure you were going to the destination you said you were. I mean, like stuff like that. So you have stuff way that I think many people would consider very innocuous, and stuff that many people would consider overreaching. And the question is, how do you decide? I think a lot of it is by letting the consumers decide for themselves. I think most consumers are who are playing in this space, when presented with questions clearly enough, can make that decision for themselves. I think that there will be a slow change of culture for what is the norm. All right, getting targeted for boots, I don't think that's, some people will consider that a rabid violation of privacy. Many people now won't, and maybe that shifts over time, but I think consumer choice is the biggest shield for a business practicing this. It's just, for us, it's a no-brainer.
Let's go over here. This right next to
Hey guys, primarily for Jen King, but feel free to pitch in. So when I used to design for kids, I would follow COPPA guidelines, and it was easy, it was clear. Now when I'm designing for adults, working on a hardware video camera, I'm using usability research and my own moral value system. And that doesn't seem like enough to make a statement, an argument to the bosses who are very set with their ways, right? So what else, what other resources, what other people, positions can I tap into and use to be able to really make a case for privacy first?
Right, that is such a good question. And it's one that I've worked on a little bit, but honestly hadn't made the progress on it I would personally like. In that, going back to that kind of discussion during my talk of like code of conduct, or something that you can point to as a designer and say, hey guys, like I have to do it this way. Ideally, I have to do it this way, or the organization that credentials me or makes me a design professional will kick me out and I will lose my license. I mean, that's the kind of ideal scenario I could imagine. I don't know if anybody would want to be in that world as designers, but I mean, that's the kind of connection I would like to be able to see. So as I'd say quasi-academic, I guess I'm mostly an academic, we do a terrible job of communicating out to non-academic audiences. So I had a vision before I got stuck writing my dissertation of actually trying to distill kind of the privacy by design principles into more of a workable document for people like practitioners, is what I'm trying to say, people like you, so you could have something to say, this is the way we should do it. I utterly failed in that quest. I would like to succeed at it.
There's still time.
Yes. Part of it is, getting some of us out of our academic worlds and trying to talk at practitioner events too, to just kind of build interest. So that's why I was delighted to come talk tonight. But yes, I feel like there needs to be absolute focus on trying to get those things. The research is out there. Like the academics have done the research. There's practitioners at a handful of companies that have done a lot of this work. Generally, there are large companies that have been in trouble with the Federal Trade Commission, so they were forced to hire people to think about privacy. That's where we've seen the most of it, the Googles, the Facebooks. And so there are people at big companies doing that work. There are also people at other companies that are doing it. Salesforce, who hasn't been in trouble with the FTC. I know they've been doing some work. So I think it's a matter of trying to get some of that information out of both academia and some of the practitioners who've been in the space and distill it into something, a website, some kind of professional code. I don't know what the organization is that's best suited to kind of see this through. In my academic space, it's ACM. And I feel like ACM would do so much better to actually reach out beyond its academic borders to partner with more practitioner organizations. ACM is the bigger governing group that runs CHI, for those of you who go to CHI, and other kind of CSCW, the handful of design-ish conferences in academia that cross the lines between practitioners and stuff. It needs to happen. I'm sorry, I just haven't been able to do it.
All right, just because we have a few more hands up, and I want to make sure we get everybody to let's go to the next question. There's over here. There's a 1, 2, 3. Yeah, you want to go first here? You go, and then Dan, if you want to line up for this corner over there, perfect.
So I have a big picture question packaged in a specific question for Jason. So I'm curious how you lined up the resources and funds for the anti-hate speech. So the big picture question behind that being always lagged invention. It's inherently reactive. I mean, I find what you say about leveraging this technology to be really inspiring. But I wonder, like, how do we hack capitalism and monetize or incentivize actually designing for betterment and improvement, right? Because I have always found, Julia Onwin, who you mentioned, wrote the book, right?
Julia, I forgot. Thank you
She was my professor in grad
Oh,
school.
great.
Wow.
Yeah, so I have always felt like do no harm and don't be evil. Like a double negative does not create a positive result. You know what I mean? So what's the tipping point, right? How do we get companies to actually design for good? I think it's similar about like the question just before, how do I make the case for privacy? Is it, like, what's the tipping point? Is it consumer education, right? Because you were talking about consumer choice. How does that change?
It's just a light question, and you had to pick me first. You said my name. Thank you. That's huge. I don't know. Is the truth? From my personal experience, companies are made up of people, which I find to be a massive plus. Because companies are terrible, but people are awesome. And if you find the right people in the companies, you can typically make a case for it. So with respect to like funding the right things, there are ways to do that within your companies that you then work for or end up working for, where you will find funds. My company is just starting this, Wunderman Thompson is just starting this practice called Wunderman Thompson for Good, where we are actually throwing money behind this idea of how do we design for something that makes sense. One of our first clients with that is Tommy Hilfiger, where we helped design and market their adaptive line of clothing. So clothing for people with disabilities, zippers that you only need one hand to zip, kind of stuff. And it's so how do you find people with a passion for a certain thing and connect them to something that they believe in before it becomes regulated as a proactive thing? I think that finding people within companies is it sounds oddly dodgy in terms of dodging the question, but I truly believe that that's the best way to make a difference. That's the best way I've found to make a difference, at least.
Just to add on to that too, like until designers unionize and do privacy by design and have like a code of conduct around that, one of the best things that I've seen as practitioners is like the type of work that Kathy Baxter at Salesforce, she's the chief AI ethics officer, so write that thing down, tweet it out too. But like she speaks to, hey, how do we make sure that we're speaking to our company values? So like Salesforce has a company value of community. So if we're launching this, how is this product like focusing on or helping us build our community or something like that? We at Amazon have one on customer obsession, and I think it gets back to your question originally about like, hey, how do we make sure that we have these values as a company, like these are our core values, like I'm taking the stance that I'm embodying this company core value, and I think that makes it easier too, so you're not using your own values, and like you can also get other people to maybe buy into and be like, hey, we're all embodying customer obsession and stuff. So that's what I've seen work really, really well. Also, there's a ton of AI ethics toolkits out there. If you are not aware, I'll share a link with a bunch of them too, but definitely take a look, and that's definitely something to point to and be like, hey, there's other people thinking about this, so.
I want to add diversity and inclusion, I think is one of the best tools for just getting different voices in the room and really being committed to that and bringing new voices to the table.
So there were a couple of questions in the back here. Yeah, perfect.
You guys were great today. So many thoughts in my head, but I'm going to say something that possibly would be good to hear your answer. But I'm the guy where I click constantly, like accept, log on with Facebook. I'm like scrolling through the privacy, not even reading it. And I guess the issue I have is that you have to go way back, it seems like, in time to see a point in history when our privacy, when it was violated, caused all this destructive behavior. And also you have to move way into the future with like Black Mirror or science fiction to see the future of losing it. But right now with Uber, I'm happy that 5 minutes after they'll know where I am, because their value proposition is that they can get you anywhere with all these different vehicles. And I guess the issue I have is I like that I can buy things fast. Can you give me a couple of examples of where I can see it right now that the lack of privacy is dangerous in the existing condition of business? Even the fact that you right now with the Twitter, the fact that you had found all those hate texts is technically violating their privacy. And in a way that you've tracked them down, so it seems to me as just being a benefit of having less privacy because we're in the US now. Is that, tell me how wrong I am, tell me right now what's going on. Well, prove me wrong, that we're safe and losing our privacy is a good thing.
I'll start, Mike's in mind. Just to say, I think there's disparate impacts, and so, how do I put it? I think that it's not a clear-cut issue. It really depends on who you are and whether you're in a vulnerable stance in the world. If you were an undocumented migrant, for example, and you have location tracking on your phone, I mean, there's so many possibilities that my head actually starts to freeze. Just to say that I think different things bring you convenience, but depending on your stature in the world, other things can put you in real jeopardy. As you're talking about Uber, I'm thinking of the number of stories I keep hearing from women who take Uber rides and have had really negative interactions with drivers who have turned off the ride essentially and tried to take them into places and essentially rape them. And of course you can counter and think, well, at least you have location tracking on your phone when that happens so that you can be found. I mean, I guess part of it is, I think, thinking about being able to make those choices. For the most part, our ability to make the choices is being taken from us. It's pretty much you are opted in by default across the board, and it becomes extremely difficult for you to exert any control over all those different kinds of things. And it's also extremely time consuming. I mean, there are definitely places where the trade-off between convenience and privacy, of course it makes sense. But I think the problem is that we end up trading it off in so many little ways every day that it just keeps growing until when you actually want to try to wrap your arms around it and say, wait a second, I don't want Google to know where I'm at every second of the day. Trying to negotiate that and figuring out how to prevent it from happening becomes a huge time sink, inconvenience, pain in the ass, I mean, you name it. Like, how many people have actually looked at their Google search history? Or do you know that you actually have a Google search history by default that is turned on that will go infinitely back, at least I think pre-2010, if you've been using Google that long? I mean, take a look at that. Some people look at it and they go, oh, look, I remember when I was looking at, cat videos all day. Look at there's all those searches from like 2009 when I was like really into that. I mean, it can be kind of like this yearbook, and other people look at it and like, oh my God, like look at everything that they know about me. So, do those things cause you direct harm? I think it really depends on kind of who you are and what's happening to you in the world. Let me follow you.
Yeah, well, I was just explaining to the two of you. One of the cool exercises that we developed at Stanford, in a previous lifetime, I was a disaster responder for the American Red Cross. I was, so like Hurricane Sandy, it was a shelter manager and all this stuff. But we would do this exercise called a pre-mortem. So imagine like you are at a disaster site, you have 400 people who need food and beds, whatever. Then you have to like go through the mental exercise about like how do we get to this situation, how could we prevent it, how could we have had a better response. We developed a similar exercise, but for AI disasters, which I'm so stoked about, and I'll add the website links to it too. But like for instance, say a genetics company is acquired by a social media company and you've never done your genetics test, but your sibling has, and all of a sudden you start getting genetics targeted ads about like sleep apnea or like cancer. Like, that is one data set join away from like being almost a reality, and like who's accountable, who gets to make those decisions, how do you say no, how do you give your feedback and control, like Jen is mentioning too with location data, you almost have to opt in to even use the service, so we do not use social media at all, but how do you stay in contact with people, and like what are the real life implications of that too, like could they then target an entire population of folks who have a similar genetic makeup and put up ads targeting like a certain type of prescription medicine or something? Like, all these are possible futures that are not too far off, and we don't really have clear guidelines about like how organizations are set up and who's accountable for all this, and is it just gonna be a bunch of people being like, not my problem? I don't know. So it's really important to think about. I know that like it's really convenient right now, but like, and some of the things that we're using it for are really nice and great, but like we do have possible features like you mentioned, like Black Mirror, not too far off.
I'm a huge fan of, I'm so lazy and I love data. I work in data. So I'm with you in that. I turn a lot of stuff on. I keep it on because I find a lot of value in it. That being said, a lot of design, from the design metaphor, it's corner cases. It's the edge cases that really take everything that you thought was a good thing and turn it into an active nightmare. And so for everyone in this room, having your search history on means, thank God I don't have to remember the login page for my bank account again, just type it in. But if you're the 15-year-old kid who was searching how to come out to your parents on a shared computer, and then your parents saw that, that's a bigger deal. And it's an edge case that maybe none of us will have to deal with. I won't have to deal with that. Like it's not part of my sort of linear path that will happen to me. But we basically, when we build models and machines to do lots of things fast, we have to recognize that the machines themselves don't think particularly well past what we tell them to think, past what the data informs them to think. So we have to think of all of these edge cases. So I'm with you, like we can sound awfully doomsday-y sometimes. We're actually super fun people, like we are. Like, down to the last, we party hard. You go to a data conference, it is just for reals. But the truth of the matter is like we have the data that we have is it's an asset, it's a valuable one, and every data point. I tell every person that joins my team, every data point is a person. Every data point is a person, and if you mess with that person, if you get 99 people through fine and 99,000 people through fine, and one person not, you still got to pay the price for that. So anyway.
So we'll have time for one more question, one final question. Yeah, I think here. Here we go.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi there. Do you think that business models could actually be a way, another channel in to pre-bake the privacy into the way that money is actually made? Because if we think about surveillance capitalism, it's making money off of surveilling others without our consent. So if we design the business to make money in a different way, and I know that flies in the face of your business if possible.
That was cool though.
So like, Jerome Lanier and his, I'm sure it might not have originated with him, but he's talked about instead of having, the money per click, it's like, why don't we have the money go to the creator? I know that's not the windfall, but it would be a huge shift, but maybe are there other ideas that you guys have all entertained about different ways of making money off of our data?
Yeah, I think that's a great thought kind of path of, all right, right now it's really profitable, frankly, to monetize data. If I have someone's data, I am X times more likely to be able to sell them a certain thing than if I don't. And that makes it, as a business owner, you want that data. I mean, the logic pretty much falls in place. I think there is value in privacy. And I don't think, to your point explicitly, I don't think we found a business model that supports that yet. And it terrifies me that it might be the death of somebody before we do value that, or something horrible might lean toward that. But you look at something like, I don't know, like DuckDuckGo, which is a search engine that doesn't track anything. That's their proposition is we don't track jack. Like, come here, search whatever you want, no one will know anything. And they, I think, started with great intentions, and it is great, thinking that people will value that. They will come to our browser to do their searches, or to our search, our search bar to do the searches, and then suddenly we will be able to monetize things differently. And it didn't happen. People didn't care, or they didn't know about it well enough, or the marketing budgets weren't there. So for me, if either the population isn't ready to support that business model, or their marketing wasn't good enough, or their product wasn't good enough, I don't know, I'm not enough of an expert, but you have to have the story, the marketing, you have to have the population be excited or ready or scared enough to do it, and then the product has to work. And I haven't seen anything that the best, VPNs maybe can monetize privacy, but I don't, like, who else?
Well, Apple came out with their campaign about like privacy is now a feature of everything, and like we even see on like in-home devices, like smart home devices and stuff now too, like the Google Hub. Home. Well, it's the hub, it's like the screen, I think. It doesn't have a camera. And they're all like, we don't have a camera, privacy, haha. And like the new Amazon one too, I think it even has like a little slider, like, you know how we all put tape over our cameras? Like they built that in as an actual, like, yep, you slide it, can't see anymore. So it's really interesting too to see like privacy as a design affordance now, in like very tangible systems. I really like your example.
DuckDuckGo is not out
But is it like, how successful is it, market share perspective?
Google has 70, what, 80%? I mean, that's hard to compete with, which is why we're talking about antitrust. I actually gave a talk at a marketing conference on a panel on antitrust. Everybody in there wanted to talk about antitrust because they're like, we hate Google. We hate Facebook. Like, we are all the independent companies that want to advertise, and we hate them. Like, we don't even want to do behavioral targeting. We actually are fine with contextual advertising, and we think it works. But, they dominate the commercial marketplace so much that we don't, there's very few competitive options out there. I was really shocked, actually. I don't usually talk at marketing conferences to hear this conversation. There are products out there that are trying to compete on privacy. The thing is that what we'll see, I think, at least for now, and Apple's an excellent example of this, is privacy as a luxury good. And really, the entire marketplace of free has to fundamentally change in some way. Whether it gets legislated forcibly, or again, privacy as a luxury good takes off as more and more people realize, wait, I don't want every aspect of my life tracked. I'm going to actually go ahead and pay for Signal if Signal actually but essentially, that's where we'll see it probably first on the margin. And we are seeing, again, with Apple and others, that if you can afford it, you can potentially have it. But of course, that doesn't bode well for all of the millions of people who can't necessarily afford it.
Yeah, it's also something that we see all the time with smart cities. So yeah, it's like folks who can afford to live in like the suburbs and not have to take public transit and everything too. Like people who are on public transit, their image is constantly being captured with CCTVs. There's shot spotters. If you don't know what shot spotters are, they're like auditory gunshot detectors. But they're installed in low-income neighborhoods, especially all around Oakland. Like from my house to downtown, I passed 3 of them. But like low-income communities are under a lot more surveillance than say folks who are not in those communities. And I think that we're also seeing that model not only in smart cities in our physical space, but also like the digital products that we're seeing too. That I really like that of like privacy is the luxury good. Like, haha, I'm not tracked.
Well, I'm so grateful to have 3 wonderful people like you in this space and thinking about it and coming up to us and talk to us about it and educate us. So with that, thank you so much for being here. We're just a round of applause for all of our 3 speakers here. So what we're doing is we're moving on to the part of the evening where we're rounding out with the LinkedIn workshop, which I'm really excited about as well. So Stephanie Lucas is going to first give a quick introduction about that workshop, the work that she's been doing around weeding out bad actors, at LinkedIn. And then going to do an interactive exercise here at the front space of the stage. So anybody who wants to listen into the talk, stay seated or mingle around. If you want to just come and be for the interactive exercises, come close to the stage. Otherwise, you're all very welcome to still stay behind, grab some more food or drink, network a little, get to know each other. And thank you so much for coming. So Stephanie, with that, bring you on stage. Thanks so much.